Welcome to another sparkling edition of Plank of the Week, the most popular TV show that we do here at Talk Radio TV. And I'm delighted to say for the first time ever, I can't imagine why it's taken this long, we've got Cristo Foufas, my fellow broadcaster from Talk Radio. Cristo, why have you not done this before?
Why has it taken so long?
I don't know. I mean, we started in January, right? It's now August.
Been banging on the door of this studio for 8 months and you finally let me in.
Well, I think it's because you're normally asleep at this time of the day, but we've got special dispensation. Emma Webb is here for the multi-times time.
First time in the studio.
Whatever that is. First time. Are you the first time in the
Yeah.
studio? Brilliant. Well, thank you for coming in. We are now, of course, allowed to bring people, human beings, back into the real world where we can actually sit next to one another without having to do it on bloody Zoom. So welcome to Plank of the Week. Don't forget, if you haven't done it yet, go and subscribe to the YouTube channel where we've got loads and loads of great stuff going out every single day of the week. Lots from the Talk Radio station itself, but lots of other stuff as well. Let's kick things off, Emma. There's been plenty of planks this week. Who's your first nomination?
So my first one is someone that no one will have ever heard of.
Okay.
His name is Joseph, and pardon me if this is wrong, Ejiofor.
Okay.
He's the Labour leader of Haringey Council.
Of course.
And so the context of this is this was reported way back, I think it was in June, and then again the beginning of this month, that there's a primary school called Rhodes Avenue Primary School that wants to change, or their former pupils are campaigning to have the name changed.
When you say former pupils, does that mean pupils who once went there but are now activists? Do you think?
Or in this case, the Labour leader of Haringey Council.
Yes.
And so I don't know whether he's actually a former pupil or not, but basically the reason why he's a plank is because they're lobbying to change the name of this primary school. Even though it wasn't named after Cecil Rhodes, it was named after Thomas Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes' grandfather, who I think died when Cecil Rhodes was 3, possibly never even met him. He was just a farmer.
Okay.
And the reason why they say they want to change the name is because of the family's legacy of, and quote, white supremacy, imperialism and support for apartheid. So just guilty by association. He was his great uncle.
Yeah, that was my mistake. You see, I only thought it was Cecil Rhodes that had that history, Cristo. I mean, I didn't realise the whole family tree, going all the way back to the year dot, was all about white supremacy.
The mind gymnastics I've had to do to get back to why that's controversial. I'm sorry, I nearly booked a holiday to Rhodes. Should I not?
Well, I presume they'll have to rename it, won't they?
It's a good job it's called Avenue rather than Road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. But you know, this sort of ties into, and I know we might get onto this a little bit later, but this idea of trying to cancel history. And, you know, one of the ones I had in consideration this week was Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, you know, the pair of actors. And they have issued this sort of heartfelt apology for somewhere where they got married in 2012, which was a former plantation, Boone Hall, very famous former plantation in the States. It's not been a plantation for 165 years, yet they are hugely upset and hugely apologetic for the fact this is after they donated $1 million to the NAACP, yet they still were taken to task by people. But the words they've used, I actually made a little note of what they were saying.
Married there, they were aware of the history of the place because they don't keep it secret, do they?
No, I think they just saw a nice venue on Pinterest and thought, well, that's great. But now lots of people are saying, look, former plantations, you must never, ever even consider getting married there. And I'm just wondering, how far do we have to go back? Maybe there was some slave labour when I built my house in London. Maybe someone got injured and hurt.
It's possible.
You know, how far back do we now go where we try and rewrite things? And my fear is, black people can get married in this venue. This venue is no longer a plantation. This venue actually commemorates the terrible slavery that happened there. So the battle is won. You know, this place has changed. There was a black person living in the White House. So I feel like there's a lot of arguments going on about silly things here when the big picture is forgotten. But I have to just read you their apology really quickly. They said it was that they were deeply and unreservedly sorry. It's impossible to reconcile. It's a giant effing mistake. They have to repattern and challenge lifelong social conditioning, and they feel ashamed. They've let themselves down. They need to be informed about how deeply rooted systematic racism is. They literally found a nice wedding venue and got married there.
Presumably they're going to have a ritual burning of the wedding pictures. I mean, if you have such things. things.
No, they had another ceremony because they felt so guilty about the old one.
So they've actually
they had another
trashed it
ceremony
altogether.
at home, and I can't bear it any longer because we're missing the point.
It's just the degrees of separation are just increasing abstract. So this guy, the Labour leader, he said that talking about Thomas Rhodes, well, we would have never named a road after him or a street after him if we were naming the roads today. Even though, of course, he lived before Cecil Rhodes,
right.
So it's abstract in the opposite direction. He couldn't possibly have known who his nephew was going to be. And what are they supposed to do? Cut off their own bloodline because everybody's guilty by association because somehow they profited from it.
I mean, it's pretty bad news for Adolf Hitler's dad, isn't it? Because presumably they're going to find wherever he was,
or his great uncle,
whatever he did, and whatever anybody's got to do with anything that he had anything to do with. I mean, it's just mad, isn't it?
Any association at all, and the irony is, and as I was saying, we're now talking about things that happened hundreds of years ago, which was valid, that, perhaps that should be a conversation.
Yeah, we need to know that it happened
today.
Yeah, but also, there's these people who want to not mention slavery or to, disassociate themselves from it. I mean, I don't feel as if I'm associated with slavery. I had nothing to do with slavery, right?
No.
However, I'm glad that I know that it went on because it's an important part of where we all came from and an important part of what we all know about the history of the Western world and, things that were done which we wouldn't do now. But there's no point pretending it didn't happen.
But you also can't rewrite things today to suit what should have happened back then. And the irony, of course, with this story is we're not talking about racism today, we're talking about what happened hundreds of years ago. The irony with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, we're talking about two privileged white celebrities rather than racism, which actually is the total antithesis of what we're supposed to be trying to do, isn't it?
So, well, speaking of which, you've got Prince Harry, who normally would be in Plank of the Week, but I'm going to give him a break this week, but he almost made a very late entry because he's done an interview with somebody over in America, some human rights activist, in which he has basically said that we all have to be better people, that we all have to improve ourselves because, we don't feel that we're doing enough to make sure that we root out at all times, institutional racism. Now, he's the only person in that conversation who has had to apologise for using a racial slur against one of his fellow candidates at Sandhurst when he was training to be an army officer.
A Nazi outfit in your wardrobe.
He did also wear a Nazi outfit, which I also haven't worn. No. So he's telling me basically to clean up my act when I haven't done anything wrong.
Do you think Harry or Meghan might give an interview or do a video soon where they just talk about how their life is quite nice?
No, because it's not. Because they're only just surviving. You don't forget, they're only just surviving. I mean,
the irony is, of course, though, that when they're sort of distracting themselves with all of this stuff, like we've seen, today, I think it was a Sky News journalist waving at the migrants coming across the channel, and they'll talk about the buildings that were built off of the proceeds of slavery and cities that have profited from slavery, but none of them want to talk about how Serco is profiting from the human trafficking on the other side of the channel.
No, exactly. Isn't that interesting? Funny enough, Serco don't want to talk about it much either. But let's get your first nomination, Cristo.
Right. Well, it's sort of tied in a little, and I do this with a heavy heart because I do think there is a debate to be had around stop and search. I do think it's credible to ask those questions about why people might be pulled over in their cars, whether there's any kind of profiling going on. I think that's all valid. But Dawn Butler MP, unfortunately this week, does have to come in for some plankery.
She does.
And the reason is because if I was an MP and I wanted to expose this terrible situation with stop and search, I would make damn sure that the example I put out was a terrible example of racial profiling and stop and search. Yeah. And sadly, I don't feel that Dawn Butler's video was that. I feel that...
Quite the opposite, in fact.
Actually, you're right. And also in the Sky News video, so she put out a tweet saying, watch this space, interaction with police coming, which I also felt was a bit misjudged, like it was, breaking news kind of thing. Then she released the video and went straight on Sky News afterwards and gave an interview saying how aggressive and how the situation was escalated by the female police officer in the situation. But the video doesn't show any of that. No. The video shows a very pleasant interaction from the police.
And it's
the
also
police
only a small portion of the bit that she filmed, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, if I was an MP, bearing in mind what's happening at the moment with the police and attacks against the police on the rise, bearing in mind the horrific situation we had with PC Andrew Harper and the verdict that came a couple of weeks ago. I think these are sensitive times when it comes to the police force, and I think that an MP, if you're going to write or give an interview and say that an officer was unpleasant or escalated a situation, you better make damn sure the video you put out shows that. Now, what I think would have perhaps been better judged, and obviously the body cam footage on this might expose that we're wrong or she's wrong or whatever, but certainly with what she posted,
see that, are we?
well, I think the police have requested for it to be released, but the police have, because I think they are a little bit irritated by this idea that it was unpleasant or that the female officer, as Dawn Butler said, escalated the situation. And I think what would have been better judged would have been to have put out a tweet saying, just been pulled over, great interaction with the police, very, very polite. I will be asking the questions about why my registration was checked. And I think that's a valid question to say, why did my registration be put in?
She could have done it in a very different way, because once you saw the video, she was laughing. She looked like somebody who was actually rather happy that it had happened.
Well,
she certainly didn't look
unpleasant
unhappy.
was her.
Sitting there with her camera waiting.
I mean, like
for them to
I
do
had this
something
idea in
wrong.
my head that maybe she's been driving around for weeks waiting for someone to pull her over, because, you know, finally now somebody has, and she seemed pretty pleased.
Well, but also the only interaction that I heard with the female police officer was from Dawn Butler, when Dawn Butler was actually quite rude
Berating
her.
to her, saying, don't patronise me, when I didn't feel that she'd been...
If anyone was escalating the situation, looked from the video that Dawn Butler published that it was her. It's completely irresponsible, because she's putting that... I mean, the police officer looked like he was being perfectly professional and polite, and now she's plastered his face all over the internet, along with accusations of systemic racism. That's something that's... you can't prove that wrong once it's been said. That sticks, and that poor police officer who was just trying to do his job and possibly made an honest mistake.
Completely agree, and if you're going to try and have this debate, it needs to be a proper example, not an example that we look at and say, well, actually that was quite reasonable. Now, I'm sorry to have to say this, and I'm someone who really feels that these debates need to be had, but we cannot have a situation where when a black person is pulled over, it's immediately presumed it's based on racism. You know what? Sometimes black people, white people, all different skin tones, all different sexualities are going to be pulled over, and it's going to be really irritating, and it might be a mistake. I would love the police to admit it to being a mistake the way they did with Dawn Butler in a perfectly polite way. But that does not necessarily always mean that it's racism. And I think we just need to be careful when we say that.
But also you can see from the reaction of all the lefties precisely what they think of the police as. And I think it was quite irresponsible of her to kind of brand the police as institutionally racist, because effectively she's saying to anyone else who might be pulled over by the cops, don't put up with it.
Yeah.
Just you know, give them some flack, give them some stuff back, and tell them you don't think you should have been pulled over. David Lammy said that his thoughts and prayers were with her. You know, Ash Sarkar said, you know, oh, I'm so sorry this has happened to you. Are you okay? Owen Jones, you know, solidarity. I mean, you know, it was a routine traffic stop. Nothing happened. She wasn't arrested.
I think, didn't he just enter her registration number incorrectly and thought that it was registered in Yorkshire?
And as I said, and it was, basically I think he got a digit wrong or something. And fine, ask the question, why was my number, why did you need to check my number? Perfectly valid question, but you can't tie that into an immediate presumption of racism. But most importantly here, this is not the reaction and the actions of a government in waiting, of a minister in waiting. And had she done it in the way I think I suggested, didn't like it, but actually the police were really responsible, it's led me to ask some questions, I would look at that and think, that is prime ministerial, that is ministerial, that is someone who I could vote for.
Right.
I'm sorry, I can't vote for someone who I think misrepresented the interaction.
Yes.
It looks like more low-grade labour activism.
Yes, and it's all about her rather than about the actual issue, which is the thing. And also the most ridiculous thing I found was that people were beginning to debate the tone of skin of the driver. You know, was he white? People were saying he was white. Well, he looks white. Does he? Oh, is he mixed race? I mean, what difference does it make? You know, why are people even arguing?
The debate has got us to this point, and we should be questioning.
Yeah, so we're now, instead of
questioning
an important part of the story, people are going.
But we were on my programme. We were kind of saying, well, actually, and I to believe at face value what she said, that she was the passenger, that there were two black people in the car. I believe all of that. I was just yet to see an horrific or impolite or escalated situation from the police, and I think that it's irresponsible if you're an MP to say this happened and then put out a video where that didn't happen.
Right. And she's meant to be a lawmaker as well. My first nomination is Brian Cox, who's a very clever man. He's apparently some kind of astrophysicist or something like that, right? And he stares up at the sky. He was in a band once called D-Ream, who did that awful song, Things Can Only Get Better, which became the anthem for Tony Blair the night that he won the election in 1997, which I've never forgiven him for. Terrible, terrible song. But he came out with one of the most bizarre statements I think anyone famous has ever said, for no apparent reason, but it was all around this argument that we've all been having about the migrants and the boats and, you know, whether or not they should be coming here, whether they're asylum seekers, whether they're terribly desperate people. And basically, he said that we should do away with the phrase, the British people, because he was responding to a Priti Patel tweet in which she said something like, we know when the British people say they want to stop illegal immigration, that we have to do what they want us to do. And he basically said that the British people as a phrase should be banned, shouldn't be used ever again by anybody because it creates division. But then in the next tweet he puts out...
Is that xenophobic or is it racist or is it a mixture of both? Because I'm damn sure if you said that about another nationality, you would be in all sorts of trouble.
Well, exactly right. Sorry. And then, funnily enough, in the following tweet that he puts out, he refers to European citizens, right? Which actually don't exist. So he's quite happy to keep the phrase European citizen, which means nothing, and do away with British people who actually are a nationality with a British passport. And it's ridiculous. And I double-checked with my kids to make sure that I hadn't just gone completely off the scale, gammon mad, you know, as I'm often accused of doing. And I said to my oldest 15-year-old, I said, do you consider yourself British? Yes. Do you have a British passport? Yes. Would you say that you're one of the British people? Yes. So I'm like, well, so what's Brian Cox doing? I went to respond to him, found out he'd already blocked me. I don't even know why. But he spent most of Sunday blocking everybody because people are just going, what's wrong with you? You know?
But I just, again, I'm really sorry, but I'm really trying, because again, I really consider myself someone, you know, I always get accused of being like the lefty on talk radio because, you know, I'd like to talk about things like equality and things like that. So that always happens. But increasingly...
I'm a fan of the European Union.
And I'm a quite big fan of the European Union. I didn't think that we should be leaving the European Union, though I accept the result, don't shoot me. So, having said all of that, though, increasingly I feel that a lot of the people who you would consider on my side of the debate, I don't want them to be on my side of the debate. Because again, when you come out with something so moronic, what do we end up talking about? That, rather than what you were just discussing. There are genuine issues or questions to be asked about migrant crossings. And the question is not, should we use the phrase, the British people? That is the last question around
stop
this story.
appearing so much on the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Well, I did wonder about that, whether he would have a problem with the British Broadcasting Corporation. I also went for a little paddle with my dog on Sunday, and I put a tweet out saying, I'm just having a little paddle in the English Channel before Brian Cox changes its name, you know, because he might prefer to call it what is it, the sleeve they call it, I think, in France.
Or just the channel. It just should be the channel. It shouldn't have a nationality attached to it.
We can't, you know, give it any kind of, you know, gender
or
specificity.
Is that discriminatory against other bodies of water?
Well, I don't know. Rivers and it's bizarre, isn't it? But this is the trouble, you know. They take these words and you know, this whole kind of, you know, cancel culture, because it's now about words that you can't use or words that you can't say. It just seems to me to be a remarkable kind of place that we've arrived at. I had the same argument with Layla Moran months ago, back when we had the tent down in Westminster, when she said to me that she was European. I said, well, that's fine, but the European is not a nationality. You know, you can't be European as a nation, as your nationality. She said, but I feel European in my heart. And I'm like, well, that's fine, but on your passport, you're British. And that's, you know, basically where we are.
But you're allowed to feel that in your heart.
But you can't say that you're British, but you can say that you're European.
I know that you know I'm, like I said, passionately love the European Union.
Yes.
However, I've never heard better arguments for Brexit than some of the people you're bringing up.
I know.
In the debate.
I know. Unbelievable.
I'm joining your side.
Okay, well, let's go for your second one.
So my second is Laurie Penny, the journalist. Yes. So she put out a tweet earlier this week, and I put her on this list because her tweet is just so confusing. So she said that she was talking about her pronouns, and she said that she refers to herself, or is happy to be referred to as she. In public, in a professional context, as a feminist. She said, because she thinks that she has worked hard to earn it, and that she then compared it to, or she seemed to compare it to, a PhD,
Yeah.
so that she'd worked hard, and it was like the title doctor to be
Right.
called she. But in non-professional settings, she prefers they, them. And then she got attacked on Twitter for this.
Right.
Probably, I imagine that some of the attacks I
So
would
when
expect.
people say that they, them, does that mean if she was sitting here where you are and it was a professional situation, I would refer to her as she? But if I was talking
But
to...
at home, she's they, them.
But when would I use they, them? So if I'm talking to Cristo about her, would I say she likes to be called she, except for when she's at home, when she likes to be called they, them?
So you'd have to, if there was someone else at the house, you'd
Yeah.
have to say, Christo's going to be home at 7. What time are they home?
They.
They.
What if they're already home?
What time
Can you say
are
what
they
time
going out?
What time are you home? Would you not? I mean, why are they using the third person?
You would expect, though, that because she's talking about earning
Right.
being referred to
I
as
see.
she. But if you have to earn being referred to as she, does that mean that when other people demand that you call them by certain pronouns, that you don't have to call them by that unless you feel that they've earned it? I don't know if that's the reason why she was being attacked.
Can't you just call her by her
or-
name? I mean, is that not allowed?
But so she deleted the tweet in the end and said
that
that
why
she
it's
was getting a lot of hate
confusing?
for being
This is
genderqueer.
amazing.
or-
Do you know the
I have
point is,
no idea what any of that means, really, honestly.
I don't mind if people want to have different pronouns or whatever pronouns they have. There's no skin off my nose. It doesn't bother me. It genuinely doesn't. What does bother me, though, is that there's a lot of mind acrobatics that sometimes needs to be done around this, and people make mistakes or get it wrong, or they refer to someone who would rather be a they as a he or a she. That's not a crime. It's not horrible. It's not someone doing it because they are hateful. It's just that it is, as you have just demonstrated, as I think Jack Monroe has just demonstrated. It's a minefield and it's quite confusing. And I think actually it's one of the most intolerant examples, I think, of where people seem to get so angry.
All I can say, generally speaking, is whenever I encounter anyone on Twitter who has he, him in his Twitter description bio, he's normally... I don't, I just seems to work out that way. Maybe I've just been unlucky, but I'm not sure if I can even say that. But they'll bleep it out if it's not fair.
It's all
but
right.
do you know what I mean? Let's have your second one.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to need so much time for this. You might need longer for me. Okay. Can we talk about Will Norman,
Yes.
Sadiq Khan's cycling guru?
Yes.
I don't want a plank for him. I would like a forest, please, chopped up and made into a pile of planks. Because I've come up with London's cycling strategy. Let's close all roads and turn them all into cycle lanes.
Yeah.
Yay, pay me 98 grand a year.
That's it.
I don't understand what is happening.
But take 10 years to do it, mind you, so that all the people who are driving around can't get anywhere.
And can I also do it in a way, please, that isn't a way of just providing safe and reasonable infrastructure for cyclists? Can I do it in a way, please, that reduces road space as much as possible? Because I am absolutely 100% convinced there is a double agenda here. I think it's reasonable for certain junctions, certain parts of our big cities to have cycling infrastructure. I think what would also be reasonable would be to have some compulsory basic training for cyclists, because a right-of-way doesn't always mean safe.
No.
But that's another matter.
Right.
However, unfortunately, the cycling infrastructure that has been designed in our cities and that Mr. Norman advocates on his very high salary is a kind of infrastructure which not only is nonsensical because it involves sort of contraflow situations, it involves going the wrong way around Parliament Square, the cycle lane on Vauxhall Bridge Road, you're actually directed into a group of pedestrians waiting at a crossing. So not only is it moronic, but it's also, as I said, takes up as much road space as possible. So it creates the very congestion that you're claiming you're trying to solve. Now, these cycle lanes, if you want to have them, if people want them, great. Mandate them. Have it mandated via an election. Put it in your manifesto. Make the local councils. Because I'm sorry, it is not, in my opinion and in my knowledge, a scientific fact that cycle lanes cure COVID.
No.
So why they are being tied to our fight against COVID is... Well, I'll tell you why, because of course people are worried about COVID. They've looked at 45, 50,000 deaths, rubbed their hands with glee and thought, great, we'll use those deaths to bring in infrastructure that is nothing to do with COVID. And it is shameful that they would do that. It is shameful what they're doing to our cities. And I'm afraid to say that the reason I feel that this is being done, as well as to create congestion, is because they've only got about 10 or 12 years left, because we'll all be in electric cars soon, and they need to create as much congestion as possible, so that therefore in 10 years' time they can say, well, look, we still need to charge you for what we charged you for the ULEZ, we now need to charge you for the congestion charge, because look at all this congestion which they've created.
And it's not just London either. Have you seen that roundabout in Cambridge that came out the other day? It's some kind of Dutch-inspired roundabout that looks the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
You give way as a driver. You approach giving way to pedestrians on the pedestrian crossing. You then sort of inch forward, and then you've got to give way to the cyclists passing.
But it's got
then you
like
can
all
enter
these
the
white lines. But it's got white lines everywhere. I mean, if you look at it, there's an aerial shot of it, and it literally looks like the creation of a madman. You know, who's just been drawing loads and loads of things on a spirograph. It looks like a spirograph pattern.
You have to give way as you leave the roundabout for pedestrians and cyclists, thereby
So you
completely
stop on the
defeating
roundabout.
the object of a roundabout.
Yes. Well, this is the thing. Also, if you've ever been across Blackfriars Bridge at any time recently, particularly in the dark, it's incredibly confusing because there's lights everywhere which don't really apply to where you are. So, like, you'll see a green light that's sort of there, and you'll go, oh, I can go. And then somebody goes that way across you.
If COVID has taught us anything, it's that even in supermarkets, we
Yeah.
can't handle planning. You know, like one-way arrows that lead you into a
back the other
locked
way.
door. And
I forgot the margarine.
round
you know.
and round and round, two arrows pointing at each other.
The other thing is as well, you know, if it had been really well thought out, people had come up with ideas. There were so many ways. The Blackfriars Bridge cycle lane is a really good example, actually, of one that gets used, but then probably after about 9:30, one cyclist an hour. Now, why there couldn't have been, we've got these bollards, why couldn't they have made smart lanes that came up from the road so that the cycle lane is a segregated cycle lane just for the peak time hours. But why does the rest of the day, the same has happened with the congestion charge, by the way, as well, that's been doubled in the length of time. It's gone up by 30%. And again, can you please tell me...
Now it runs until 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, can you tell me how someone driving into town at 9:30 on a Sunday night being charged £15 cures COVID, please?
Yeah, it doesn't.
Of course it doesn't.
It really doesn't.
And it is profiteering from a pandemic, and it is shameful that these people are doing that. It really is.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, Jamaica Road, which is where I come in from, which is kind of from Greenwich into London Bridge, there's points at which the cycle lane, if you're going east, goes from the left-hand side of the left-hand lane to the right-hand side of the lane coming the other way.
Yeah.
And you have to cut across a traffic light and pedestrian crossings to get there. So all these cyclists come up to this light here, and if they don't know what they're doing, they have no idea where to go.
Yeah.
And they kind of get halfway across the road and stop. And you're kind of going, it's like a madman's done it.
And you want me as a car driver to now get on my bike and actually just abandon every single piece of common sense I learned as a car driver and now go on the opposite side of the road, contraflow, wrong way down a roundabout or a bridge. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that.
No.
So you're discouraging me from cycling. You're not actually making me want
There
to.
aren't already enough deaths from knife crime.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
it just doesn't make sense.
Heaven forbid they should actually try and address anything to do with knife crime. I mean, you know, that was coincidentally, was it not, one of the things about Dawn Butler's experience and her story on the Sunday came the day after a kid was stabbed to death in broad daylight in the middle of Oxford Street. And everyone's talking about Dawn Butler's...
I think the mayor is too busy with his commission for the diversity in the public realm.
Oh yeah, he's changing
nonsense.
all the street names, isn't he? Because they were all made up
He's
by Victorian
preoccupied.
slave owners.
But the point is, the police actually during the stop say they're looking for, I think, guns or drugs as well. And one of the things that is happening is that, as you will know, a lot of people are coming from the north or various other parts of the country to come down and to deliver ammo, to deliver guns, and all those sorts of things. So if a Yorkshire plate comes up, it would seem reasonable just to check whether that was something suspicious was happening.
Exactly.
Isn't that what we want
Common
our police
sense.
to do?
Well, quite. That's exactly what we want them to do. Another organisation we haven't heard from for a while, actually, because the one good thing about COVID is that the sort of eco-planks, as I call them, have remained relatively quiet. But unfortunately, Extinction Rebellion popped up the other day. They're not the main ones I'm going to name today, but they popped up the other day and poured a load more fake blood all over the steps of the outside of the National Portrait Gallery, which is a beautiful part of London, you know, just by Trafalgar Square. I don't know whether they cleaned it up. You know, these are the same people that sprayed the Home Office with it, I think, once before. You know, these people got anything better to do? I mean, you know, for God's sake. But the main ones are the Friends of the Earth. The Friends of the Earth came out with a statement and said that basically they were very concerned about the sea and the plastic in the sea because all of the PPE that people are using all around the world is largely made of plastic. which it probably would be and should be. I mean, it's the argument I always used to have with these idiots when they would say, oh, we must ban single-use plastic. Well, actually, in medical places, single-use plastic's quite important. You know, you can't keep using the same instruments to operate on different people because they might have disease on them. You can't use, you know, paper straws to suck somebody's, you know, diseased appendix out. You know, you need to use something that's made of plastic. And of course, PPE, protective equipment that people are wearing to stop themselves from dying of COVID, is going to maybe end up in the sea. Sorry.
Do you know what I would love some of these organisations to do? Because what is annoying about it is that there's a grain in that. Like there is a point in that. There is about plastic in the oceans. No one likes plastic in the oceans. Why doesn't one of these organisations just say, right, we're going to give £10 million to the first person that will come up with a single-use plastic that's completely biodegradable? Why aren't places like this using capitalism to incentivise those people? Or why aren't governments using capitalism to incentivise people to come up with solutions rather than banging everyone on the head about the problem which you and I, and you as well, can't just solve by not using a couple of bottles. But what governments could do, what governments around the world could do, could use our economic and political systems to actually incentivise. It's going to be, I know everyone says capitalism ruins the environment, but it'll be capitalism that gets us out of it.
Yeah, well, exactly right. But also, what about a bit of research? I mean, I think there's some kind of company which has developed and devised some kind of enzyme that eats plastic, right? That kind of thing. You know, well, if you can do that, then, you know, multiply it, make sure that's the best way to dispose of it, and away you go.
I imagine they're probably part of the same crowd that thinks that science is white supremacism and that capitalism is evil. So
well, that is the problem, isn't it, with all these groups. When you cut right down into the middle of them, they're always run by some mad anarchist who doesn't want us just to stop flying altogether. He just wants there to be no planes. And he wants you to live in a cave and eat turnips for the rest of the time.
You're right, and actually when you drill down, the point is, again, and this sort of brings me back to my point about Brexit a little actually, is that when you drill down to a lot of these organisations where you agree with the principle, who doesn't agree with the principle of maybe cutting down on their waste? Who doesn't agree with the principle of equality between the races? But when you look then, drill down some of the groups, well, Black Lives Matter, just coincidentally, they'd like to abolish capitalism. Oh, Extinction Rebellion, just coincidentally, they'd like to abolish capitalism. They all end up being these sort of crazy Marxist communist groups. And you think, well, actually, that's nothing to do with the equality message that you're trying to put.
But they're all terribly good at raising money. I mean, they make a fortune. I mean, whoever has come up with this great communist anarchist plan to destabilise capitalism is making rather a lot of money out of it because they're getting all this money from stupid rich rock stars who hand them over sort of, I think it was that guy from Pink Floyd who handed Extinction Rebellion something like £2 million, just wrote him a cheque.
So that ironically they could end up being the perfect model for a capitalist organisation.
Yeah,
absolutely right.
Eventually they'll get their communist state and they'll remove the mask and it will be the sort of hyper-capitalist dream.
And it'll be Napoleon standing there saying, you know, some people are more equal than others. And you'll be going, oh yeah, I remember reading that somewhere. What's your final nomination?
So my final nomination is Christine Jardine.
Oh, yes.
I think that's how you say her name.
Good friend of the show.
Again,
Christine.
someone that I think probably most people have never heard of. So she's the Lib Dem equality spokesperson.
Right.
And she has called, or she's putting forward a motion at their conference in I guess next month. Apparently they are.
I suppose they don't really need a conference hall for theirs.
And so
there's only 11 of them.
They just sit in a minibus.
It's a big Uber.
That's all it is.
So yeah, she's calling for them to investigate the British Empire. So she wants rather than buying a book and doing what they usually say, you know, educate yourself, read a book. She wants an investigation into the British Empire and its legacy.
I wonder who they could get to front that up. Maybe you should get Ed Davey to do it. Sorry, Sir Ed Davey, because he's got nothing else to do.
So what, like an inquiry, like a proper sort of...
Or like a sort of like the Chilcot inquiry.
Yeah, like the McPherson report.
Yeah. They're going to find it a bit difficult getting any witnesses, aren't they?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, who are they going to ask to come and appear? How are they
going to raise Cecil Rhodes from the dead?
And, okay,
First order of business.
Statue out of the canal.
Decide what to do with all of their ancestors and...
By the way, speaking of Sir Ed Davey, weren't they supposed to be having some kind of leadership contest? I thought they meant to be having that.
Oh, I don't know.
Because I'm sure that they were having debates.
Happened, we just didn't notice.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, I'm sure they were having like those kind of final late stage debates between him and Layla Moran, but nothing seems to have happened.
they booked the cab for it, but you know, fortunately, social distancing
didn't turn up.
I just again, why? Just why? What will be the conclusion? But also, Yeah, what would be the conclusion other than it was terrible and we shouldn't have probably done a lot of the terrible things that we did?
Maybe they would conclude actually it wasn't so terrible. Maybe they would conclude that
I
if it
don't
wasn't
think that's
for
on the cards.
don't you think?
They wanted to look at the wrongdoing, and I think it was
what you mean?
like the effects on rights and so
Do you mean
on.
they've
But it wasn't
prejudged?
like rights
Do you
and
mean
wrongs
they've prejudged the result of the inquiry?
Yeah, exactly. But
Goodness
apparently,
gracious
what
me.
they want to do though is, this is very Extinction Rebellion as well. They want to set up a citizens' assembly.
Oh, great.
Because when you get down to it, it's always
It's all gonna
exactly
be
the
about-
same
Well,
thing.
it's always a citizens' assembly because they can't win any elections. I mean, that's why all the people who never win elections want citizens' assemblies because that's the only way they can
they want
put
these
in charge of
citizens'
anything.
assemblies to basically decide which monuments and things that we should. It's a bit like Khan's Orwellian commission, but they want citizens' assemblies that decide, what we memorialise.
Yeah,
and
because
that kind of thing.
in
Change
fact,
the
I sent you a thing.
curriculum.
Do you remember on Twitter the other day of the fact they've started that in London now?
Yes,
They're
yes.
reassessing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is what I was saying. All the street names.
everything.
He's claiming that all the streets were named in the Victorian era, which isn't true, apart from anything else. Pudding Lane was not named in the Victorian era.
No.
It was named before the Fire of London. That's why it's in the book about the Fire of London. It wasn't actually named by somebody after the Fire of London.
But
for God's
the
sake.
facts don't really matter to these people
No.
because they still wanted to pull down Robert Peel, going back to policing.
Yeah.
They still wanted to pull down Robert Peel, even though it was actually Robert Peel's father they had a
wrong
problem
Peel.
with. They got
Yeah.
the wrong Peel, but they said, no, pull him down anyway.
Yeah.
But there were parts of the empire that were terrible. There were parts of the empire that were not so terrible. There were some things that we did in the past that maybe as a nation we should question. There were some things we did in the past maybe as a nation we should be proud of. I really don't see, other than acknowledging...
Just
thank
just
you.
write that down.
Thank
Send
you.
it to what's her face, Christine.
Oh my God, I'm a
Jardine,
Lib Dem.
and just say that's it. There you go. There's your answer.
I'll
You don't
be
need-
elected leader with that
Save
insight,
save
you know?
yourself a load of money. Christo sorted it for you.
I feel like, and again I keep saying this point, but we're so concerned with what happened back there and fiddling around with it that racism today, hello, homophobia today,
Yes.
hello, now.
I really can't get over the fact that the same people who are, fixating themselves on street names and statues just don't seem to care at all about modern slavery issues. They don't care about the incentivising of these human traffickers that are probably pumping all of it's something like 22 billion, I think, that these traffickers, the estimate is that they will have, million that they will have made since the beginning of this year.
Yeah.
That money is probably going into things like sexual trafficking and modern slavery, and these people are talking about street signs.
Exactly. It's quite remarkable. And also, they didn't care about the Leicester sweatshops. They didn't care about the sweatshops in China or in Pakistan. I mean, every time there's a World Cup, I used to have a friend of mine who's an Asian journalist, and every time there was a World Cup, he'd go and do the same story, the same place in Pakistan where they make all the Nike footballs, and they're put together by kids, who are paid nothing.
You know what's gonna happen?
And every 4 years, nothing changes.
But in years to come, in 100, 200 years' time, there's going to be a new Mike Graham, if you're not immortal, sitting and doing his plank of the week in years to come, and they're all going to look back and say, do you know, in the year 2020, they had all these terrible social problems, and they all had these awful things that were happening, and all this modern slavery, at the time wouldn't be modern then, and but they were all worrying about what happened in 1700 and all this terrible thing happening, and we're going to be judged in the same way as the slave owners of years ago.
Sorry to mention the sinner, but it's a little bit like Sir Francis Drake playing balls while the Spanish Armada is coming in.
It really is. It's quite extraordinary. Well, my final one, going back to the migrant issue, is Gary Lineker, who hasn't appeared on Plank of the Week for a while. He's been on it a few times, it has to be said. Because he can be very plankish, but he's also a massive hypocrite. He's another one that's blocked me, by the way. So I only saw his tweet because somebody sent it to me. But he put out one of these tweets the other day, making out that he was, Lord God Almighty, the man with the softest, compassionate heart in the history of the world, and basically saying that all these people that hate foreigners, should really look hard at themselves and should be thinking about welcoming these poor, desperate people to our shores. And if we can't welcome them here, then what is the point of being a country? It's another one of these kind of, bleeding heart liberals. Gary Lineker, who makes, 1.8 million or something out of the BBC every single year. Sorry,
could I rephrase that? We
out
pay
of
that,
us.
yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
We paid. Another one like Brian Cox, paid for by us, right? But it's just all this virtue signaling. I actually had a Tory MP on. He said, listen, I've got a message for Gary Lineker. If he wants to give me his postcode and all his details, I'll be happy to send him a few migrant workers to go and hang out in his house, because I'm sure he's probably got a few spare bedrooms. But of course, it's like Lily Allen when she went to Calais to apologise to all the asylum seekers on our behalf. And I was like, well, you're not apologising on my behalf, thanks very much. It's nothing to do with me. But they do this thing where they've all got this kind of secret society where they pat each other on the back and say, look at me, look how, sort of kind and compassionate I am, and what a good guy I am because I don't hate foreigners. Because they're accusing you of doing something that isn't true. They're basically saying if you're being critical of the government and you don't think these illegal immigrants should be allowed to come here, somehow you hate foreigners.
It's odd, isn't it, how they don't seem to realise that they're in, or maybe they do, but they don't, they're in their little bubble, and they don't seem to even, maybe they don't care, maybe they just think that the majority of people in the country are raving, mouth-foaming racists, but, why are they still doing it?
I know.
We're all so tired of it.
Right.
So much we've spoken about today is actually demonstrative of something that we've lost, and that is any kind of nuance in debate.
Or just common
sense. Do you
sense.
know what? You can care about asylum seekers finding safety as well as not wanting people to make that journey. I'm one of those people. I don't actually think that we should be promoting the criminality behind those journeys. And that's the thing actually that I think is a really important point. There are criminals making a fortune.
But this is what I'm saying. All these
desperate
so-called humanitarians who are for the arrival of illegal immigrants onto the shores of this country and then the housing of them, they're actually propping up organised crime.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and it's the organised crime element. I think if you are, look, I've got to, stake a bit of a claim here, in as much as the partner, the love of my life I have, 25 years ago, left Syria, moved to America. His family had the foresight to know what was kind of happening there. Works for International Rescue Committee between London and New York, so he's made a really good contribution to society. So I have to be honest, when I look at this debate, I do so a little bit through the eyes of, for a chance of fate, my partner could have still been in that country when it started to fall apart. So I do have that sort of tinted view when I have this conversation. So I do think we need to have a conversation about trying to provide and taking our fair share of people who are genuinely in need of asylum.
Yeah, but see, that's that phrase, our fair share. Why? Sorry, I don't see that we have a fair share to take. I'm sorry that they're having a bad time.
No. Lots of other countries, we don't take as many.
But I don't care what other countries do. The bottom line is, surely, if you live somewhere that happens to have gone horribly wrong, there's an international effort that can be made to make that place better. But it's not for every other country in the world to suddenly go, oh, we'll just come and live here then.
No, I'm not saying every country in the world says to everyone doing that, but I think it is a response. No, because there are lots of other countries around Europe, France, Germany, as you know, took 1 million migrants a few years ago.
How's
we don't do anywhere.
It's not going terribly well, is it?
No, it isn't. It's probably the reason we left the European Union. The point I'm saying is that I do feel if you have this debate, it needs to be alongside a debate about how we can, because also if people knew that there was perhaps a safe and credible way to get to the UK, that might perhaps reduce the demand of some of these criminal gangs as well.
But there is a safe and legal way to get here, but they don't wish to use that because they'd rather come illegally, because that way it's a lot easier.
Presumably a lot of the people who are coming over illegally are the ones who are economic migrants who can mysteriously afford the £5,000 to pay to the traffickers.
Exactly.
But we should be trying to find out where that money is coming from. That's another question that journalists don't seem to be interested in.
And that is a huge problem, and that is why my concern is there are people who need help, and we're not a selfish society. We've got a really good history of helping people who need it when they need it.
However,
I worry that some people aren't genuine who are trying to come, and it is just profiting in these criminal gangs, but that doesn't mean we should just close down the debate about whether we should ever bring anyone.
I'm never about closing down a debate.
There will be people who are coming here through the legitimate routes.
Yeah, I mean,
we just
there are
don't
lots
hear
of people
about them because they're not turning up on the Kent Coast.
I mean, forget about the illegal immigrants who are coming on boats. I mean, there are plenty of legal immigrants who are coming through the system who come here every single day of the year. And so, it's a nonsense to say that these are the only people who are coming to Britain. There's loads of people coming to Britain.
I'm not saying they're the only people that are coming to Britain, but I think it's a slightly different story if you're attempting to sort of claim asylum in Britain.
The asylum seeker laws were set up in very different times, right? We are now looking at an entire sort of continent, practically, of people who don't like where they live because their places have become lawless. And I'm not going to buy it that we made them lawless, because we did not make Syria lawless at all.
No, and I don't think we are responsible for every problem that's happened there.
No,
I don't
we're not.
buy that either.
And therefore, we don't need to feel guilty in some way that we should help anybody. I just don't think we should help the people in this country before we help anybody else.
Why can't we? Isn't there an argument to say that we could try and help both?
No. There
Why?
isn't. Because then we have finite resources and we're a small country and we don't have a lot of room.
We are the 6th or 7th wealthiest country in the world, whilst I absolutely accept.
Well,
I
we
don't
won't be
think,
for much longer if we start giving it all away.
I don't think that we're not going to be giving it all away, and I don't think that it's unfair
Very
or
serious,
wrong.
this plank of the week, isn't it?
It is that this
supposed to be funny.
I know
I'm just going to start laughing just to lighten things
Yeah, I
up.
know.
So what I told you, I said, "Oh, don't you, Gary Lineker, because we're going to get into it, and I won't be able to keep my mouth shut." No, I don't think that it is unreasonable for a country as wealthy as ours to take a number of genuine people who are seeking asylum, because you know what? It's just the nice and right thing to do.
Well, so far,
I absolutely
we've
get.
taken 60,000 this year. So, I think you're probably getting what you want. But I don't think it's a good idea.
I think France is 140 this year.
Well,
But
good for
anyway,
them.
just
They can
saying.
take as many as they like. I
I'm
don't live in
just saying.
France. I don't have any responsibility for the French.
You're not a European citizen,
No,
mate.
I'm not. Absolutely
Just
not.
checking.
I'm a British person. I'm one of the British people.
One of the British people.
As denoted by Brian Cox. Now, this is a bit you haven't done this before. So this is a bit where we whittle down each of our three nominees to one, and you choose. So why don't you choose your favourite one of Emma's, and you can choose your favourite one of mine, and then I'll choose my favourite one of yours. Should we do that?
All right.
So tell us what your three are. The Haringey
Yeah, they're
guy,
their
however you
names.
could call him.
The Haringey, Labour leader of the Haringey Council, Laurie Penny, and Christine Jardine.
There you go. So which one of those three would you like?
What was the Labour leader of Haringey Council? Oh, that was the school Rhodes.
That was the Rhodes, yeah.
Him. That's
No question.
Just him.
No
yeah.
question.
Like,
We'll put
the
him
Laurie
down.
Penny thing, I don't understand the tweet. The Christine Jardine, Lib Dems, okay. The inquiry into the British Empire, it's a bit silly. But yeah, Rhodes.
Rhodes, definitely, yeah.
Rhodes.
And I'll get the guy spelling off you later. Now, my three that you choose from: Gary Lineker, Friends of the Earth, Brian Cox. Brian Cox, very good choice. And your three?
Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
Will Norman, cycling guru.
Yes.
And Dawn Butler for the.
It's got to be Will Norman. It's got to be, I think, because he's ruined London. This
Yeah,
guy.
I mean, I could go on. Do you want another hour on him? I
No,
could go on.
No.
Absolute shocker,
I've
though,
got to
if
get.
Dawn
I've got
can't
to
be
get
crowned
somewhere.
Queen of the
As much
planks
as I
this
love
year.
arguing with you, I could do it all day. We'll have to do it in the pub later. So we've got Brian Cox, the Haringey guy, and Will Norman. So those are the top three. One of them wins. One of them comes second. One of them comes third.
You're not allowed to pick your own, are you?
Well, you can nominate, and it can be a majority decision, unlike some political parties we could mention. So
Did I get 2 votes?
Yeah.
Don't tell Brian Cox.
I mean, I would nominate Brian Cox as number one purely and simply because he's British. He works for the British Broadcasting Corporation, as you say, and he doesn't like the British people.
You see, I would go, I'm sorry, I'm going to still fight my Will Norman corner, because I just don't understand the lunacy that is happening on our streets, and I think someone to use COVID as a cover for a land grab.
No, the only caveat I would issue to that is that it is a very London-centric.
You're
And
very
Plank of
right.
the Week is indeed...
I still firmly believe that my Labour councillor is the
Oh
plankiest.
my God, so we're really in a bad way here. So
You really are.
Yeah.
You have to draw straws.
we've never had a dead heat before. This has never happened.
Has
I
it
may
never
be willing
happened?
to make a concession in the direction of Brian Cox,
Okay.
but I still feel
No,
that
do you know what?
he's-
I am going to
Well, if you-
release Will Norman.
If you release Will Norman into the third place,
I'm
right,
going to release Will Norman into the wild.
you could then be
On
the,
his
you
bicycle.
can then be the casting vote.
All right, I will. I'm going to remove myself.
So,
from,
but he still stays as number three. So
He'd
he's,
still
you
say
know,
as number 3. I do think, whilst I'm annoyed by Rhodes, I think someone who works for the BBC, who has the profile of Brian Cox, to not like being called British people.
Yeah.
I think, and actually, like I said, I think that he's got away with something that if he were to say it about another nationality, imagine going on the television, imagine going on the BBC and saying, I would like to no longer use the term the Indian people
Yes.
or the French people.
Yes.
That you can imagine in
the
the
German
TV
people.
centre or the former TV centre, there will be people apoplectic, having episodes, vomiting,
Yes.
their heads swivelling round.
Right.
They wouldn't be able to cope.
no, no.
Seriously.
And he'd never work again. A
He
bit
would
like
never
Lawrence
work again.
Fox. Lawrence Fox, right, has told me that he doesn't think he'll ever get another job in television.
Oh, well, you know my views on Lawrence Fox.
I don't really, but I mean, regardless of
Let's
that,
not start that.
regardless of that, it's ridiculous, isn't it? That's his job. He's quite good at it, but now
Yeah.
he can't get another acting role because of something he said on Question Time.
Well, you're not allowed opinions anymore that
No.
people don't agree with. And again, it's what I say, there's no nuance anymore. It's either black or
amazing.
white, no context, that's it.
Yes. Well, so there we are. Brian Cox is Plank of the Week. Well done, Brian. You've won another award. Thank you very much indeed to my guest, Cristo Foufas, who will be on, of course, at 10 o'clock every single night.
I'll tweet Brian and tell him because he's blocked you.
Yes, please do.
I'll do that.
Make sure that he knows very well why
do that.
as
I'll
well.
do that.
And please do refer to me as one of the British subjects of the country. Emma Webb, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you next week. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's called Talk Radio, and we'll be back next week.